Okay, let's pause. Okay. Okay, this is English 115. We are talking the memory chapter, which is chapter 2 in your textbook. We're going to be talking about how memory works with studying. And in this particular lecture today, you're going to find out basically how your memory works, but also strategies that work better with your brain to get information into long-term memory, which is usually your goal. And we'll talk about that in a minute, the different levels. So just as a preface, I guess you could call it fair warning. You have a test on chapter 2 in this module. And for the test, what I want to give you a heads up on is that anything in the book, anything in chapter 2, anything on the PowerPoint, and anything I say in class lecture is eligible to be a question on the test, right? So when you are preparing or studying, you want to work on, obviously the book, you're gonna read the chapter, and then maybe reread if you don't understand everything, right? And then you're gonna maybe take notes on it, do a little annotating to kind of help stay focused. And then I would recommend you go through the PowerPoint. You can print off the PowerPoint and then make notes on each slide. And then while you're watching lecture, I would say have your PowerPoint in front of you and you can make notes on that, notes on a separate sheet, so that you can capture maybe some important information that I share during lecture time, okay? So we are working how memory works with studying. Resume. Give me a hot minute. So we are talking the memory process. So this is the thing I want to start with, and you'll find this in the chapter. And this is kind of a visual of the memory process. So when we get information, we get all information through 5 ways. Do you guys think you know what are the 5 ways? You want to take a guess? How does your brain get information?
Your sensory.
Yeah, it's through your senses. That's exactly right. So we either get information through your eyes visually, right? Through your ears, auditory, through your nose, olfactory, right? Kinetic, which means touch, feel, and taste. Okay. So in the college arena where you're at now in academics, only 3 of those ways are used to communicate information to your brain. So obviously you can read things visually, you hear things through lecture. Sometimes it's both, you see it, read it, and hear it, right? And then occasionally you're also going to have the kinetic, which that is probably something like a doing, like maybe you are in biology class and this part goes with that part, or maybe chemistry class where you combine certain things to get a reaction. You're physically doing something, right? We don't have smell-o-vision, right? You remember Willy Wonka? Well, we do not have smell-o-vision, so the nose will not work. However, a lot of times, people, like if you're going into culinary areas, that is a very big part of how they get information, how something smells, certain odors can reveal certain things in a recipe. And then taste. And bottom line, if you eat your information, it will not come out the way you want it. So you do not want to do that, right? So those are the senses. Now, the senses feed your information to the brain. And the first step is, that's sensory input. It comes through the senses and it goes to what's called working memory. And that's a temporary storage area in your brain, right? So through the senses, it goes to working memory. The problem with working memory is that it is finite. It has a finite amount of space and you can only hold it there for a finite amount of time. So it's very limited, right? So if you want something to stay, you have to process it, do something with that information to get it into long-term memory. If you don't, you simply lose that information. So let me give you an example of this. So I don't know how many of you drive into work. Did anybody drive into work today? Nobody. Okay. Okay, let's go walk. Did you walk to class today? Right, okay. So think about what is everything you saw and heard? Can you name every single thing you saw, every single thing you heard while you're sitting here in class? If I gave you a list, can you list every single thing? No, because it's not really important to your brain, you didn't process it, so it's, for lack of a better word, in one ear and out the other. So you may have heard conversations, but you may not remember every single word that was said, right? Same thing, maybe you were listening to your earbuds for music. Again, you may remember the song, but you won't remember every word. A lot of times, and when I'm driving into work, I don't even remember all the songs that were played, right? I might have a couple that stick out, but so again, I'm not committing that to long-term memory, mainly because it's not important that it gets in there, right? Now, if you want working memory to get to long-term memory, you got to do some sort of encoding with it. And encoding is what you're doing with the information to get it to go into long-term memory. Because if you don't do anything with it, you forget about it, right? So think about maybe a TV show, or I mean, one of the shows I love to watch is the History Channel, right? I learned more history than I ever did in school from the History Channel, right? However, even when I watch that, I may not remember every single fact or every single piece of information that they shared, right? If I want to remember things, I have to encode it. So this is in the academic world. You get lots of information. So for example, today's a good example of I'm giving lecture. I'm going to talk about all of these things, right? But I can almost guarantee within a half hour you walk out, you're going to forget most of the things that we talked about. You may remember a couple. That's why you have to encode, you have to do something with that information to get it into long-term memory so it will hold, right? Make sense? So we're going to be talking about these different things, but a couple of primary encoding things. You can rehearse and repeat. I think a lot of us do that one. Rehearse means you kind of practice, say it out loud, and then you do it again and again. So I always think of that as like practicing your lines in a play, right? You practice them, repeat them enough, repeat them different ways. Creating mnemonics, we're going to be talking about that. Mnemonics is what I call the secret weapon. I use mnemonics a lot. Mnemonics is when you take a concept and you create either a rhyme, a riddle, or an acronym, those type things that help you remember what that is. So for example, if I ask you to name the Great Lakes, how many of you can do that right off your head? Okay, you might be able to. Anyone else? You might be able to. Nick? No?
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of, but would you get all five?
I believe so.
Okay, good for you. So if you had a really good, I think, fourth grade teacher, that's when they teach Michigan history, I'm not sure what grade. I know I taught it in fourth grade when back in the day when I was a young teacher. We would always teach the kids an acronym called HOMES, HOMES. And each letter represents the name of a Great Lake. So H is Lake Huron, right? O, Lake Ontario, M, Lake Michigan, Erie, and Superior, right? So even if it's a Jeopardy moment and I'm like, oh, I can't really think of it. Oh, if I remember Holmes, it's like a prompt for me to remember them. We have all kinds of those in different ways. Nursing is really big on this. So when you go into nursing, they teach all kinds of different acronyms to help you remember particular concepts, okay? So there's creating mnemonics, chunking, making associations, reformatting, and then of course using multiple pathways. And we're going to talk about these a little bit later on in my lecture. So after you're encoding, you're doing something deliberately with that information to get it into long-term memory. These are the things that affect how it's processed in long-term memory and how long it'll stay. The number one thing that affects it is attention. How much you pay attention, single focus always is the strongest. If you can give it your full attention, full focus, you have a much better shot at getting it into long-term memory and holding it for a long time. That's why your teachers always used to say, put your phones away, or, you know, stop playing with something. They want your full focus on whatever it is that they were teaching. Another is how important it is to you to remember that information. So for example, if it's a survival thing, you learn how to build a fire, because if you're in the woods and, you know, you gotta try to stay alive, yeah, you're probably gonna get your full attention, and it's important information. Your brain knows it's gotta stay in it, right? However, let's pick out the academic arena. In the academic arena, how important is it for you to know that knowledge, for example, for your career, for moving on in your academic journey? This is a battle for a lot of students, only because they don't think it's important. They don't see how, for example, Math 127, the stuff you learn there is applicable to whatever career they're gonna go. Because the number one thing I hear, why can you just use a calculator, you know, right? But you have to actually understand certain concepts in the work world mathematically to be able to function. Same thing for this class. There are certain things that you may not see how important it is going to be, but they will be important to you later on in your academic career. For example, test taking skills, those type things. The environment and real life experiences that relate to it, the context in which you learn it, how your existing neural networks are developed, and then of course, emotion. So environmental and real life experiences, how much of this can you kind of relate to it, right? Have you been exposed to it? How much are you relating in your real life? So always, if you've had an experience relating to whatever the content is, you're more likely to process it and remember it, okay? Context, that means how did you learn it? What's that type of thing? Existing neural network, we've talked about this one before with dendrites, those kinds of things. The more well-developed you have of your neural network, the easier it is to remember that information. So you really want to spend a lot of time doing that. And then, of course, the emotion. What emotion are you having while you're learning it? With many things, it's just like anything. If you have a better emotion, a more positive emotion, it's easier to bring it back, right? We tend to want to avoid or not have negative emotions, okay? So in long-term memory, there are 3 types of long-term memory. So the first is obviously working memory. That's very quick, very finite, very limited. When you're doing your encoding, the goal is to get it to long-term memory, but there are 3 different types: procedural, episodic, and semantic, okay? Procedural is exactly what it sounds like. It's like a procedure where you learn how to do something, and usually once you learn it, you'll always remember it. I always think of like tying your shoes. When you learn to tie your shoes and you go through that process, it's a procedure, right? Same thing for eating. When you learn how to eat using a fork, a spoon, whatever, you don't usually forget those things. They are, number one, they're usually repeated enough. But also, that's a procedure, just like cooking. If you learn how to mix certain things, you know how to make things, usually that's procedure, and that is going to stay in long-term memory with you, right? We remember those things for a long time. Episodic is kind of like it sounds. It's about an episode. Was there some sort of an episode in your life, and it's kind of ingrained in your long-term memory? So these can be good things, but they can also be bad things. So for example, maybe you remember lots of detail. You remember almost every moment of your 8th grade birthday party when your parents got you a pony, you had a bounce house, and you had your favorite vanilla cake, okay? So you'll remember a lot of detail about that, and that's a good thing, right? But it also works with negative things. So for example, maybe you were in a dramatic situation, maybe a car accident, right? And boy, you remember that car accident for years and years and years, right? or maybe some other type of trauma in your life, right? So, both procedural and episodic, that means your brain automatically processes and codes, to keep it in long-term memory. So you don't have to do much, kind of natural. The third one, semantic, is not. Semantic is when you, for example, in our world, academic world, where you learn information and then you have to remember that information over the long haul. So for semantic, you have to do encoding to be able to process it into semantic. If you don't do something with the information, it won't go into long-term memory. It may be brief, but it won't last. And then, of course, all of this, why are, we get that information through our senses, we store it just finite in working memory. And if we do something with it, if we encode that information, we can get it into long-term memory. Now, the whole purpose of that is for retrieval, to get that information back and apply it, right? So we're processing all of that in the brain for the very reason that we can access it and retrieve it whenever we want, okay? So if you think about something, maybe, let's try a semantic item. Let's say, how many of you had to memorize the times tables in school? Did anybody? Okay. Chances are, if you memorize the times tables when you're in school, you still know your times tables, right? You can pull it back. So when I say, what's 3 times 4? Oh, yeah, okay, 12, right? You can pull that information as needed. And it doesn't really matter the situation. Maybe you are, I don't know, installing carpet in your house. You want new carpet. You're trying to figure out the area, how much carpet you're gonna need, right? You need multiplication. It may not be those exact same numbers, but I know the process of multiplication, right? And I can apply it in all different situations. Good, bad, ugly? So the whole goal of that is retrieval. Now, there's 2 ways we retrieve it. The first one is daily life, which is what I just kind of used with the carpet. But in the academic arena, 9 times out of 10, you need to retrieve that information on a test, right? That's usually the way the college tests. Do you have that information in your long-term memory, right? And that's what you're working for. You're working for that degree. That's what that degree says. You have X amount of knowledge in this area in your long-term memory, right? And then you go out into the world and apply that knowledge. But until you get there, usually you are being tested. Okay, good, bad, ugly. Now there's all different types of tests, and sometimes in the real world you get tested. So for example, when I did my CDL license, I had to, practice, do all that, and then how do they give me my license? They test me. I had to do a written test, and I also had to do a driving test, right? So sometimes tests happen in the real world, but primarily what we're talking about in the academic world, it's testing through the school, through the class, that type of thing. Okay. Questions on that so far? Uh-oh, sorry. Forgot to let Raven in. Okay, hi Raven, sorry, I didn't see you on the admit board. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, maybe. It's being ornery, it doesn't want to. Oh, I had it going so lovely. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay, information only stays in working memory a very, very short amount of time. So like I said, if you are getting information within a class during lecture, or maybe you read the book, it stays in working memory maybe a few minutes at the longest. And then, like I said, it floats away, it's gone. You might get bits and pieces every now and then, but you will not get the bulk of that information. So it's extremely limited of working memory. Okay, this is starting to annoy me. There we go. Now, memory has to be encoded to get, information has to be encoded consciously or unconsciously to make it into long-term memory, okay? So that means you have to do something consciously with new information in order to transfer it from working memory into long-term memory. Okay? It, like I said, procedural and episodic, your body will do that naturally, right? If you went on a camping trip and a bear got into your campground, right? That's kind of a scary event. Yeah, your body encoded that memory for you, right? However, in the academic world, college, information-wise, when you're trying to obtain specific information, that you have to encode. So if you don't do something with that, if you don't encode it, you're not gonna have it in long-term memory, okay? All right. Memory in the brain. Memory is not stored in one place. I think we talked about this before. Pieces of information all over your brain. So when you are trying to retrieve or, bottom line, you're trying to recreate that memory, right? It's like a puzzle. There are these pieces, you gotta connect them, put them together, and it will not be a perfect picture, but it'll be a perfect, or it'll be enough that you know what that information is, or you know what the picture is. It's like a puzzle, right? It's a little bit cracks in it, but it works for you, okay? This is maybe the exception to this is like an eidetic memory. There are very, very few people in the world that have an eidetic memory, but basically that is when you can, for example, look at a page of information, all kinds of information, and within minutes or seconds, without looking at it again, you can say it verbatim, word for word, wrote all the way through, okay? There are very few people like that. Possibly like a Sheldon Cooper. Have you guys ever watched Big Bang Theory and reruns? He might qualify as that. Memories reassembled like a puzzle, like I just said. You got the pieces, you got to put those pieces together, what fits where. Now, again, this depends on your neural network and how well you encode it. Because the better you built your network and the more you encode it, the stronger you encode it, the easier it is to fit those pieces where it is. So it's almost instantaneous that the brain is doing that. But it's not like you're going and just pulling a memory out. It's not a single thing. The brain is connecting all those points to recreate what it is. So the number one thing I want you to be aware of is you cannot remember something you do not understand. So you have to understand the information that's coming into your working memory in order to be able to process it, to encode it, to get it into long-term memory, right? If you don't understand it, you will not get it into memory, okay? So you must understand information to remember it. So I guess one of the things people do is, let's just do foreign languages. There was a group when I was, young and skinny, that I listened to quite a bit as a kid. And it's a group called ABBA. You've probably never heard of them. They were around a long time ago, right? Very famous all over the world, that kind of thing. And of course, I lived in the United States. I listened to all their songs in English. Well, their native language, I believe, is Swedish. It's either Swedish or Norwegian. I'm not sure which, right? That's where they were from, in Europe. And however, they knew to be marketable to sell worldwide, they would have to record in English because there's so many English-speaking countries, right? So they did. But essentially what they did is they kind of memorized the words, right? So a song, whatever the word is, they would memorize it, and then they could sing, and essentially you're singing the sounds. Now, if you don't have poor understanding of what those words mean and that kind of thing, you won't remember it. So in fact, two of the members, the men, the husbands, they speak English. They learn, English, and they kept up with it, and they learn more. So they now speak both English and their native tongue. The women, after they were done singing, they recorded for years, right? But then they didn't practice anymore, and neither one of them now are fluent in English, right? Which means they just memorize the words or the sounds without memorizing the understanding. I don't know about you, when I was a kid, I learned this song, it was in French, it was called Frère me Jacques. Frère me Jacques, Frère me Jacques, dormez-vous, dormez-vous. Can I tell you what those words are? I have no idea. I know it's French, right? And I'm not even sure I pronounce the words right anymore, because this has been so many years ago. But again, it was a memorization, not an understanding. So just be aware of that. If you want something to get in a long-term memory, you got to understand it first. Memory and attention. There are two types of attention. There's selective attention and divided attention. Selective attention is when you have something that has your primary focus and you are solely focused on that item. Divided attention means your attention is divided in more than one area. So the good news is we live in a divided attention world, and most of us are multitasking a lot. I talk to students all the time where they're doing homework, but they're on the computer or they have their phone and they're texting and reading and all that kind of stuff. Can it be done? Absolutely. Can it be done well? No, it cannot. So science has shown, research has shown, selective attention is way better for you to get information into your long-term memory and process it and encode it, all that kind of stuff. So when you use divided attention, if you're not giving it your sole focus, sole attention, basically you're making it harder for yourself to get that information into long-term memory. Now, there's all kinds of things that interfere with attention. The trick is, okay, can I get rid of those other things, or can I at least put them at bay? Does that make sense? So one of the things I tell students is you want to study effectively. I talk to students all the time, oh, I studied for 3 hours, I still didn't score well, or I spent, 4 hours on this, that kind of thing. So one of the number one things I ask is, how are you studying? Because you may think you're studying for 4 hours, you are not. You are probably going through the motions for 4 hours, but you haven't actually studied effectively. And effectively means you're doing it so you get results, right? So let's talk about, I'm going to tell you my lawnmower story. So my lawnmower story, I always like this one. Hopefully you'll like it too. I had, oh man, I think it was just one summer. It seemed like forever. There was a summer where my husband hurt his back. He hurt it bad enough. He ended up having surgery and all this kind of stuff. So bad that he literally physically, he could be on the couch and go to the bathroom, but much past that, he was just in too much pain. Okay. So at our house, we have what I would call traditional roles, which means he's responsible for outdoor chores. I'm responsible for indoor chores. I'm pretty sure I got the short stick on this, just FYI, but that's the way it was for years and years and years. So, for example, his job was to shovel snow, mow the lawn, those kinds of things. So when he hurt his back, obviously he couldn't mow. And so guess who's in charge of mowing? That would be me. And my husband is a little bit fanatical about the lawn. I think if he had his way, he'd be out there with a pair of scissors snipping each blade individually, right? He's that kind of, yeah. And so anyway, so I had to mow and I got my marching orders from him. Okay, you gotta go this way, then you gotta go diagonal. I want you to do this. And I said, well, I'm not gonna, no, you follow those lines, you'll see the wheel lines, you say the whatever, and I had my marching, okay. Follow those lines, right? After my first line, I'm all good, right? You go once and then you just follow and then crisscross. Great. And I mean, this summer was like 110. It was kind of like this summer. We had some seriously hot days, right? Okay. And it was always the day I had to mow. But okay, the first time I did this, I went out and he kind of hobbles to the patio, blah, blah, blah. Okay, go lay down. He goes and lays down. And I proceed to mow. fired up that baby, it was a pole mower, of course, not electric. And we have a really large yard, and it's a push mower, it's not a rider, right? And I am out there probably a good hour and a half, almost 2 hours at that point, right? And I see my husband hop out on the patio, and, I could see motion, right, so I turned the mower off. And I'm like, what? One of those, what? And he says, you're doing it wrong, or something about what the blankety blank blank are you doing out there? That's how it was phrased. What the blankety blank are you doing out there? And of course, loving wife that I am, responded, what the French toast do you think I'm doing out here? It was more like, what the blankety blank do you think I'm doing? I'm mowing your blankety blank lawn. That's what I'm doing. And then he said 3 words to me that I just hung my head. I'm like, oh, blades not engaged. So if you've ever mowed a lawn with a push mower, by the way, blade engaged means the blade's low enough that it's gonna cut the grass, right? If the blade is up, you are just blowing air over the top of your lawn. That's what's going on there. So I had gone through an hour and a half, went through those motions, I was following my lines and everything, and didn't accomplish anything, right? That's what I say about going through the motions, right? When you're not getting those results you want from studying, it's because you're going through the motions, you're not doing it effectively. You are, acting like you're reading, you're looking at things, but you're not actively doing something with it that's gonna help it get into your long-term memory. So that's what I mean with studying effectively with my mower story. So the number one thing when I talk to students is, they say, oh, I read it for 3 hours, and then you know what? I went back and I reread it. And I said, okay, well, what other studying? Well, I reread it several times. Okay, stop. Reading's not studying. That is not studying. You're not actively studying. You read to understand. And you reread as if you didn't understand and you need to try and understand it better. And it's fine to reread. You can reread 3, 4 times. That is totally fine. But you're not studying, right? You are trying to understand the information. So studying is when you are actively doing something with that information to get it into your brain. So number one, when students tell me they were reading or rereading, I tell them, well, then you didn't study. Okay. One of the biggest things, and we talked about this a second ago, is attention. So the number one factor of processing into your long-term memory is about how much attention you're giving it. Are you giving it selective attention? Are you focused on this? Do you have distractors eliminated? So again, a running joke my husband would always tell me is, I'm too poor to pay attention, right? Pay, get it. However, you are not too poor to pay attention, right? And so in order to help your attention, to get it to selective attention, you got to try to remove as many distractors as you can. Some you are in total control and you have the ability. Some, like internal ones, you don't always have that ability. So for example, maybe you went through a horrible breakup and you're just super sad all the time, right? Emotions can't always be controlled. You're going to have those emotions, right? So you got to power through it for a while. But something like having your phone in front of you, working in a noisy room, working around while people are talking to you, you have total control to remove those distractors. So the goal is to remove as many distractors as you can. So let's talk about the environment. So environment is quite often a distractor, whether you realize it or not. So the first thing is, how many of you study on your bed? Like you're laying down on your bed studying. Oh, that's good. It's the thing you don't want to do. You don't want to study on your bed. The number one thing that's subconsciously being sent to your brain is, oh, it's night time. Now, again, you're not always aware of this messaging in your brain because it's subconscious. But in the environment, when you put yourself in a bedroom, in a bed, laying down, those are the messages subliminally that your brain's saying. So all you do is make it harder to try to do selective attention and process information. Another thing is to work in a well-lit room. I talk to so many students that they'll work in the dark. The only light they have is the light from their computer screen, right? What you're doing there is you're just making it harder on yourself, whether you realize it or not, right? These are all what I call invisible barriers, right? So you got to be aware they exist, and then you got to make an effort to remove them or adjust them. But if you don't do anything, there are visible barriers happening with your brain. And bottom line, you're just making it harder on yourself and your brain to process information. The number one distractor, I'm sure you all know because I've said it a couple of different times, it's the smartphones. The smartphones are so powerful with subliminal messaging to your brain, trying to pull it away from what you're supposed to be doing. So, and I've shared this story, I'm going to do it one more time. It's so powerful that if the person sitting next to you has their phone out, even if the phone is face down, you don't have yours out, but you can visually see there, immediately you're getting some subconscious messages to your brain. It's distracting you. You start thinking, ooh, I wonder what my people are doing. Ooh, I should probably check on that recipe, whatever you guys do on the phone, right? So again, try to eliminate those distractors. For environment, you want someplace comfortable, but not too comfortable, right? Light, you want well-lit room, and avoid the phone if you can. Put it away, out of sight, out of sound, both, okay? There are multiple pathways to work on your information. So the best way to get it into long-term memory is to work on many pathways as possible. So when you're going over information, when you're encoding, you want to do it different ways to get into long-term memory. And the more pathways you use, the higher the chance it gets into long-term memory. So here are just some examples. Use as many senses as you can. So you have to study for an exam. Okay, you've got your notes, you took notes. So writing your notes, and then when you review the notes, say them out loud, so then you hear them, you see them when you're reading them. And then of course, the best is if you can write it or draw it. If you can think of like a doodle or a visual that you can associate with that, it's good. Reformatting information. Reformatting means putting it in your own words, your own way, to make it more visual or reorganized. And that's to make it easier to pull back from memory. Now, I used to work with a gal when she was pursuing her doctorate. And, you know, she's busy. She's got a full-time job, family, all that kind of stuff. She's very limited on time. So she wanted to study as effectively as possible. And she was a runner. She would run every day. She would go over to the SAC and she would be on the treadmills, right? But what she did when she was on the treadmill, because that's a fairly mindless activity, she had her notes on those big 4x6 cards, right? She put them right in front of her. So while she's running, she's reading it, and then she would say it out loud, right? Because then she hears it and she sees it, and the act of running helped it process into her brain, okay? So that's just a way of how you can use multiple senses to process information. So I want to show you something here. Memory process. I've said this before, right at the beginning. Sensory input, that means information comes through your senses. It stays in working memory very briefly. It's very finite, right? And there's ways to kind of hold it. You can rehearse and repeat. So if you want to hold it a little bit longer, you know, maybe you met this hot person, just adorable, at McDonald's, right? But you left your phone in the car, but you ask them for their phone number and they say, yeah, sure, here, 867-5309. And so you want to remember until you get to the car, right? So you say 867-5309, 867-5309, right? Until you can get to your phone and pop it in there. That's how you can extend, rehearse and repeat. working memory a little bit, right? Chunking. Chunking is when you do it in groups to help remember. So, for example, your house number is 1964 Oak Street. And you can really remember it. But if you remember it as 1964, that's 1 versus 1964, right? So chunking it, and by the way, that's how social security numbers are. If you notice your social security number is chunked 3, 2, 4, because it's easier for people to chunk and remember it that way, okay? So after working memory, you have to do encoding because your goal is to get it to long-term memory. So again, you can rehearse and repeat. There's reviewing information, teach it, space it out. You have mental fatigue, strength and recall, primacy and recency effects. So the thing I want you to remember about rehearsing and repeating, repetition means going over the same information, but in different ways. And the best example I can think of this is if you've ever done a play or had to act in some type of play or movie or something like that. You have a set of lines, the writer has written lines, and you have to say those words. But you practice saying them different ways. I saw you over there. I saw you over there. I saw you over there, right? You know, you're saying the exact same words, but you're rehearsing them differently because you want to see the end result, which is going to be best, right? So when you are repeating, yes, you are going over the same information, but you're going over it different ways, right? That helps process that information better. Chunking, we've already talked about that. Chunking is when you condense the amount of information. That's like the 1964 thing. Creating mnemonics, acronym, acrostic, anagram, analogies, keywords, rhymes, and songs. We're going to talk about this a little bit more, but I'm going to quick define them. I think I defined them later, so I will wait on that. And then you can reformat, means different way of organizing. So I want to show you an example of reformatting. You see this information? This is all the process of memory, right? The steps for memory. I'm gonna go back. Maybe. Okay, you see that? That is the exact same information you just saw on that page. It's the same stuff. It's reformatted differently, right? Which one do you think is going to be easier for your brain to process and rehearse with? Yeah, the visual. So that's the challenge for you, is when you have information and you're going to review it, see if you can reformat it a different way to make it easier for you to process. Now, again, please note, this one doesn't have anything fancy, right? They use rectangles, a little arrow action, and maybe a square or two, right? So it doesn't have to be these complicated artistic designs, right? You're just organizing. Kind of think of it as like mapping. When you do mind mapping, those kinds of things, as a general rule, you're working with circles or ovals all the time, right? And you're reformatting the information, okay? So when you have information on a page and it looks like this, your brain sees just a bunch of words on a page. It's not a natural way for it to process. So that's your challenge. Reformat it into a different way, same information, but that it'll be easier to process. As I mentioned before, long-term memory, there are 3 types. Long-term means you're storing it for future use. Procedural, that's something how you do. Episodic, what happened, like an event, right? And then semantic, this is facts and information. And in the college arena, academic arena, semantic is the one you got to really work at, right? Because it's not natural. What are the things that affect your memory? Attention, environment, importance to the learner, context that you learn it in, existing neural networks, and your emotion. And then, of course, retrieval means you're going to reassemble, recreate that memory. So this and this, same information, different format. Okay? So let's talk about mnemonics. Mnemonics is one of my favorite tricks and tips. So the first one is an acronym. Acronym is when you use a letter to represent a word to help you bring it back. So earlier I did homes, right? What's another one with just letters? Okay, SMC, we say SMC all the time, SMC, right? Southwestern Michigan College, okay, that's, SMC is the acronym for that, right? There's all kinds of acronyms out there. Off the top of my head, I can't remember too many, but there's a ton of them. An acrostic is when you use kind of a silly phrase or a type of phrase where the first letter of each word is the same letter that starts with what you need to remember. So most of us remember the phrase, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Okay, that's a math one they teach, at least in elementary school, but I used to teach it for algebra. Please means, oh, and by the way, that represents the order of operations to help you remember what is the order of activities you have to do to solve that particular equation. So please is parentheses, excuse, exponents, right? M, multiplication, D, division, you see where I'm going there? So if you remember the phrase, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, that will hopefully help bring back what the formula is. Now there's all kinds of these out there. I just can't think of any off the top of my head. Do you guys know of any either acronyms or acrostics that you learned either as a kid or as an adult? I know you've had them, it's just a matter of can you remember which ones were which? No? Okay. Rhymes is the other one. Rhymes is fantastic. You can make a rhyme out of almost anything. And then what that does is it develops a rhythm that is easier for your brain to remember. So if you think about nursery rhymes, most of us remember a lot of nursery rhymes, right? Because of the rhythm and the predictability of it, right? Poetry, usually with rhymes, that kind of a thing. I always think, let me think, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down, lost his crown. Or no, Jill fell down, lost her crown. I forgot the last bit. And Jill came tumbling after it. That's what it was. Okay. Sorry, been a hot minute since I said that one. Okay, but that's a rhyme. It still comes back after all these bazillion years that I learned it, right? So if you can make your information into a rhyme of some sort, that will help you remember it. Songs are really that way. A lot of songs are rhyming. Songs have a rhythm, a melody, those kinds of things, right? If you think about, you can maybe hear a song once or twice and already you know a lot of the words, right? You can bring that back. Songs I loved as a kid, I can still remember them today. Most of the words, if not all. Okay. So again, nothing says you need to be Katy Perry or Taylor Swift to create a song, right? They don't have to be radio friendly. They're just a song that help you remember that information. So turn your information into a rhyme or a song. So a good example of this is, Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. Okay, you got the tune. Instead of those words, use the words that you're trying to get into long-term memory, right? Same thing for a rhyme. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder where you are. Okay, right? Again, change the words, keep the rhythm or the pattern. Okay? Make as many associations and connections as you can with the information that you're learning. The better you associate and can connect it to your real life, the easier you will have processing it into long-term memory. Here are some things for more effective studying, okay? The number one thing, read before studying. Reading is not studying. You got to have the reading done and you have to understand what you read. Then studying starts. Use selective attention. Get rid of distractors. Give it 100% of your attention, right? Choose your environment wisely. Even though it's super comfy to do it in your bedroom, probably not the wisest, right? Use multiple pathways when encoding. Try to get it in visually, auditory, and then writing it kinesthetically. And then create mnemonics. Create as many mnemonics as you can that work with your information. And then, of course, make association and connections with information. So let's practice a minute. We're going to do it together. And let's try to create a mnemonic for the memory process. So I guarantee that'll be a test. So what is the memory process, right? You're gonna have to tell me step 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so remind me, what is the first step in the memory process? Yeah, we get information and that's called sensory input, right? Absolutely. So that's the first item. Okay, what's after that? Working memory, yeah. What's after that? Encoding, yep. After encoding, long term. And then finally, what's my last step? Retrieval, right? Okay. So let's try and make a mnemonic, right? I am going to take the first letter of each one. So I have S, W, E, L, R. So when I put that together, I get sweller, right? Right? My memory process is sweller than yours. Okay, so that's a little bit of an acrostic there, right? 2, right? So when I look at this, hopefully it's a prompt to me. First step is ask, what was S? Oh, senses, sensory input, right? That's what you're doing, you're trying to trigger. So you would create this in your notes somehow, some way with the information and make those associates, and then you would practice with that and try bringing it back, right? So if you can do these type things, make rhymes, rhythms, all those kinds of things, those are very helpful to bring back that information for you. Okay. All right, I'm just giving you the sources. This is where I took all my information that I talked to you about, or I presented on the PowerPoint. Obviously, the first one is our textbook. That's the one I want you to read the chapter in. You won't be judged on any of that. You won't be, I shouldn't say judged. You won't be evaluated on any of that. Okay, so let me stop share really quickly. And I'm going to stop record. Maybe